Hi everyone, and welcome to the History Gal. I'm your host, Christine Morgan, and this week is all about one of Britain's most unlucky kings, Charles I. Although he was known to be a kind man, he had difficulty ruling effectively in the face of religious persecution and political unrest that stretched across his whole kingdom. Ultimately, he was removed from the throne and executed at the hands of his own people. But Charles' story is far more complex than just one dramatic ending. So stay tuned and we'll talk about some of the men and women who stood by Charles I in his struggle to remain a king. History lovers, here are the basics. Charles I was a Protestant king who was a member of the Stuart dynasty. He was crowned in 1625, and that same year he married Henrietta Maria of France, who was well known to be a woman of strong Catholic faith. Some of Charles' subjects became nervous and suspicious that the new queen would lead a Catholic coup against the fragile establishment of Protestantism. But despite their religious differences, Charles and Henrietta Maria developed a very loving relationship. Together they had 9 children, 2 of whom will become kings themselves. For this week's episode, I've invited my friend Leanda de Lisle to come and talk with us because she's just written a book all about Charles I. She's going to help us better understand this king who met such a dramatic end and some of the events that led up to it. This book specifically talks about Charles I, and he has this nickname, which is the White King.
Well, he was said to have been crowned in white. He was said to have been the only king of England who was ever crowned in white. At first, in fact, it was used by his enemies, and they claimed that it meant that he was the white king of the prophecies of Merlin, who was a kind of doomed tyrant who lost the love of his people. But then his supporters said, no, he was dressed in white at his coronation because this represented how innocent he was. And when he was tried and executed, they said he'd been tried and executed an innocent man. And indeed, when he was buried, a description was given of him being buried in a snowstorm, and how the snow turns the black velvet pall on his coffin white. And it said, so went the White King to his grave. But what I found out, it was fake news and it became fake history. And the reason I call the book The White King is that it's not a nickname that's often heard now about Charles. And I thought, well, that might also raise people's curiosity. And they might think, oh, I wonder what else I don't know about Charles I.
Can you speak a little bit to Charles I's religious leanings?
Protestantism was introduced to England by Edward VI, but it was never really completed. The Reformation hadn't really finished. Whereas Charles, he rolled it out, you could say, across England. And so at the same time, you had these tremendous religious wars going on essentially between Catholics and Protestants, and which Protestants were losing at this time.
Charles still makes a very interesting marriage to Henrietta Maria, and it's interesting in that she's Catholic. Why was he willing to compromise there for her?
Well, she wouldn't have married him if she hadn't been allowed to keep her religion. And he married her because he wanted French money and a French army.
Right. So it's a classic case of follow the money.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. Exactly. And she was a very loyal and supportive wife to him. Really remarkable, particularly when the Civil War broke out. She went to Europe, she raised armies for him, she raised money for him, she was a diplomat, she was shelled, she was under shell fire. You don't get any other queens in Europe literally under shell fire in battle. Women in history have often been maligned, and amazingly, these attitudes have sort of persisted, and these views of these women have persisted. And so it's great to be able to strip back the myths and the legends to see the real women, to see Charles and in 3 dimensions. You need the women there. To see his reign in 3 dimensions, you need the women.
The media played a surprisingly large role in Charles I's reign. Was that typical?
No, it was new. It was definitely new. In the past, the Crown was really responsible for most printing. But now you're getting all these independent people, and there was a tremendous thirst for news. And it took Charles quite a long time to understand how significant it was, and that he needed to play the same game. He needed to use it as well.
What is this rift that happens between Charles I and his parliament?
Really, it was a breakdown in trust. He had support in Parliament and he had opponents. And he could have played one off against another, he could have formed alliances, but he wasn't really that kind of person. He wasn't a natural political animal in that way.
Right. And they go kind of on this slippery slope, which is where the Parliament, they make a law with which they are then able to try and execute Charles I, but they had to make it up retroactively.
Yes. I mean, and by that time, Parliament was not the same Parliament it had been at the beginning of the Civil War. In some sense, it wasn't really a Parliament at all. It was just it was the tool of a coming military dictatorship, essentially.
And you had written that there had been some dispute over where to bury Charles I as well, because there was some fear that his burial place might become a spot for pilgrimage and visits from the people. So what do they do?
So they decided they would have him buried in Windsor Castle instead, which was a military garrison. In fact, it wasn't even a funeral. It was literally just a burial because they had banned the Anglican, the Church of England's Book of Common Prayer. So no prayers were read. It was just all carried out in silence, and he was just sort of dropped into this hole, essentially. He has come to be perceived as, weak and stupid and a failure, all of which is completely untrue. And I think it's really, again, it's because he failed at the end, and so everyone's like, oh well, he failed as a king. He was executed. Therefore, he must have been a sort of failure all along. Which simply isn't true. It makes him much less interesting. So people think, well, why do I want to read about, this useless idiot, and his ghastly, horrid wife, Henrietta Maria, she sounds awful. So I'm hoping that when they read my book, they'll see, yes, this is a fascinating man.
I think so too. It's always nice when you can hear the voice of a mother and a father in contrast to the voice of a king and a queen.
Yes, a husband and a wife,
yes.
A lover. Yes, no, I agree.
It's really beautiful, and you've put them in here so well, and I loved it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
It is my absolute pleasure to recommend Leanda de Lisle's new book, The White King, as an official History Gal Book Club recommendation. You can pre-order your copy now by visiting a link that we'll post on our Facebook page, and don't forget to like our Facebook page while you're there. You can also subscribe on YouTube to get new episodes as they air, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram to get behind-the-scenes action. Until next time, y'all have a great week.